This is my friend Brad, and for the next 2 weeks we're going to be making their dream game. Imagine a cross between Slime Rancher and Outpath. There are just two really big problems. I've pretty much only ever made 2D pixel art games, and their dream game is not that. Secondly, I've never played Slime Rancher before. This means for this video to be deemed a success, I have to do two things. We have to make Brad's dream game come to life with at least 15 minutes of gameplay. And at the same time, I need to get the Platinum Trophy in Slime Rancher, just to prove I know the kind of game we're trying to make here. And all of this has to be done in 2 weeks. Now, I'm primarily a designer, I'm not much of an artist, but thankfully Brad is. And we've also brought in our friend Mol, who's going to be doing some concept and UI work for the game as well. I don't even know if this can be done, but let's buckle in and get started.
So, all started one afternoon in university. Me and Lazy were having a little natter, and we'll talk about the games that we liked. I asked him if he'd seen games like Slime Rancher,
and my response was no. So I went home and downloaded the games just to see what all the fuss was about. It's a really cute and fun game about ranching slimes, believe it or not. You go out into the wild, catch a bunch of slimes and fruits and vegetables you can use to grow in your gardens. You feed that food for your slimes, it produces a thing called plorts, which you sell for currency, which you can use to do all sorts in the game, like upgrade your ranch.
So for the game idea, we were very much going to do sort of almost like a Minecraft kind of thing, where you go out, you find rocks, you find wood. Very original idea. But then it kind of progressed and we were like, wouldn't it be really cool if you're in a forest, you're walking around, there's trees everywhere. What if you look down and there's just a plant made of wood? You know, you're not going to cut down a tree if it's right there. You know, it's stupid, but it's also kind of fun at the same time.
The scope of this game grew really quite large, really quite quickly. And as you can imagine, when you come up with a game prototype that includes a skill tree, a custom building system, and automated machines, we're going to encounter a lot of bugs and a massive crunch. And literally on our first day, we ran into our first major clash. Brad hadn't used Unity before, and I haven't used Unreal Engine.
I mean, I'm an artist, I can make stuff look pretty, I can't make it work. And with Lazy, mostly being a Unity developer, I would have to sort of bite the bullet and accept the fact that we probably weren't going to use Unreal Engine, as it would be faster for me to develop art and tailor it towards Unity than it would be for Lazy to learn how to use Unreal Engine. Yeah, and that was tough. I sulked a lot having to use Unity. I didn't initially, I was quite hopeful. Then I actually started using it, and then it really went downhill quite quickly.
I mean, I was having a blast using my engine of choice. I was absolutely thrilled. And this also came with the extra benefit of me being able to use my project template, which includes all sorts of things like a main menu system, scene transitions, sound manager, the works, which is going to massively speed things up. Also because I've worked on quite a lot of games over the years, taking part in various game jams and personal projects, I've managed to build up a catalog of systems that I can literally just drag and drop into my game and have working out of the box. For example, I was able to bring over the inventory system I use for Stranded and a basic building system I had used for another project. This meant I was able to absolutely hit the ground running, which I knew was going to be really, really important since, again, I've done a lot of game jams before. I know how stressful they can be. The thing is, Brad and Mol, they hadn't. They had no idea what was really expected of them throughout this process, which became a bit of an issue when it came to getting the first round of plant concepts to put into the game.
For the first concept, which is the rock potato, hadn't quite got like the process down for it just yet. So I probably spent about 2 days on it, which was definitely not needed, especially when we only got 2 weeks. I handed the initial concept for the rock potato over to Brad, and he was like,
this looks amazing, until I realized that when I got to the 3D part of making it,
and he was like, too many vines, I can't do this.
And making that first rock was not quick.
It was a pace that I'm not used to working at all. For 3D stuff, there is certain limitations. Bear in mind that this has to be modeled within, you know, a day, textured and everything. So that feedback actually was really useful.
Meanwhile, I'd been building up some of the core gameplay systems. As a group, we decided that we wanted to settle on 3 core pillars of gameplay: exploration, building, and farming. For the most part, we actually had the building aspect finished, but with that mostly ticked off, I started working on the planting system. Using one of Kenny's free asset packs, I mocked up a very basic planter and set up the system such that we would have a seed item in our inventory, and when you interacted with a flower bed, it would plant and grow over a certain period of time, and once it was destroyed, it would drop the item. Naturally, having a full world with lots of plants constantly checking whether it needs to grow or not is gonna be really poorly optimized, so I stole a trick from Minecraft's book and made a tick system. Now, instead of having hundreds of update functions constantly checking if it should grow, we have a single tick manager, and all of our plants just subscribe to that script. We set how long we want a tick to be, in our case, once a second, and the tick manager every tick essentially sends out a signal to everything that's subscribed to it, basically saying, yo, run your function. With that system made, it meant as soon as we had a renewable way to get seeds, we'd have a foundation built for 2 out of the 3 gameplay pillars that we'd set. Now, while we were waiting for Mol to finish concepting the plants, I had Brad setting up the art pipeline and creating a planter asset.
It took me quite a long time to make. It was around about a day's work, but from all of that work, we sort of was able to get 4 different versions of the planter due to the way that I made it. We basically managed to pull pieces of the planter apart and then reassemble them. We then did get 4 versions, which was really rapid.
And honestly, getting that first piece of custom artwork into the game was a huge morale boost for us all. And as a team, we really started to get into a bit of a flow state.
From this point onwards, thankfully because of the conversation that I had with Mol and the designs being a little bit simpler, not only just that, but obviously I'd hit a stage where I sort of got the style down. I kind of knew what I was doing. So the 3D art and the plants at this point, the mushrooms and the flowers, they were coming out at a much quicker rate. And then that meant that we could then get items in, get an idea for how this stuff grows, where it's going to grow, and then we can sort of start focusing on how it looks in planters and get that functionality going.
And go it did. Mol had started to absolutely power through concept art for the different plants. And Brad, now he'd set up the art pipeline, got to a point where he was able to make multiple resource plants in a single day, but we still had so many systems left to check off. I'd done some work to actually tie all the systems we had together, so placing one of the buildings, in this case the planter, would actually use resources from your inventory, and when you destroyed a placed building, it would then drop the items used to make it. I also did some work upgrading the first player controller. Since this is the first time I've really made a 3D game, I didn't really know where else to start, but I knew from working on my Metroidvania Amber's Tale, there were a few tricks I could implement very quickly, which would massively improve the feel of the controller. Things like a variable jump height and a jump buffer, as well as making some adjustments to how gravity worked, and that alone made a massive difference to how the game felt to play. I'd also asked Mol to do a few additional bits for us as well.
So I was also brought on to do UI. I have a background in graphic design, may as well use it. So I started off with making the item frames for the bottom. Initially, it was just a blank sort of box. We decided that, oh, when it's selected, we'll put some vines on it to try and tie everything together. And then from then on out, that was sort of the whole theme and that we'd go for all of the UI. The next big thing really was the volume sliders.
The volume sliders were actually quite a big return on investment, as we ended up using the design for the sliders in the skill tree that we ended up developing, connecting the different nodes together, which really added a lot of life to it. It also came at the perfect time, as that was just the system I was working on when she sent it over. I'd also been creating a bunch of crafting systems. Essentially, these would be buildings you can unlock through the skill tree, and these could be placed in the world to help you create various other objects, such as seeds for replanting in the planters, or to smelt up different resources such as the iron ingot using the coal and berry plants. Although these systems all looked different in the world and they had different models, under the hood it was the exact same script recycled. It basically just had a set number of inventory slots you could drag items into, and would have a list of recipes you can put in, turning items A and B into C. And it meant we basically went from having no buildings to having 4 very quickly. And now that we had the different workstations, I sent Mol some screenshots and a short description basically saying what each inventory does, so she could start concepting up the UI. And that's kind of when she realized,
oh, all of this also needs icons, all of it also needs like unlock buttons, you know, iconography that says it's locked. So I didn't really have kind of a task list as such. It was more just oh, we need this now.
But Mol was absolutely rapid with making all this. And with every new piece of art she sent me, the whole game was becoming more visually coherent, especially when key pieces of art, like for the radial menu, were sent over.
And to be honest, that's probably one of my favourite parts of the UI, just because I feel like it ties everything together. And it just looks really cool as well, if I might say so myself.
Now, don't think I'd forgotten about the other part of this challenge. Every evening after working on the game with Brad Mol, I'd come home and sit with Mrs. Lazy and play some Slime Rancher. I'd been absolutely tearing through the game and managed to pick up quite a number of achievements, a lot of which were actually pretty trivial. Things like jumping into a bunch of slimes, just like a ball pit, to doing really monstrous things to little chicks. Now, all the while I've been playing Slime Rancher, I'd really kept my designer hat on and really started to appreciate and understand how important things like visual storytelling are in these kinds of games. There isn't a huge narrative, but you learn a lot about how the world functions through small interactions and the way the world is crafted. And also how important it is to have just loads of different things you can do at any one given time. It's going to be so important to keep players engaged, especially when the core loop of games like this is pretty repetitive. You're basically doing the exact same thing over and over, just with different colored slimes. Now, speaking of environmental storytelling, you might have noticed the world we're testing everything in looks very different. Over the last couple of days, Brad had been doing some amazing environment work.
I sort of just went in, started sculpting some shapes, sculpted like sort of like a base island, which would have been our hub. Then I started trying to think of like maybe an interesting path that then moved up, maybe to like a secondary level, because elevation is always interesting in terms of environments. You're sort of trying to figure out the way that the player would move through. And then maybe a third elevation, which is where the player's home would be. The reason why I wanted to sort of make this really tall was so that the island could be seen from miles around. It's your home base. I wanted it to almost act like a beacon. And also, let's say we could make it to the top of the tower. I wanted it so that the player could stand at the top and sort of look out, you know, sort of like, these are my gardens. I can see everything. And this is what I have made.
We did end up coming to the conclusion that modeling a fully furnished tower was going to be the definition of scope creep. But we didn't want to get rid of that big landmark, so we replaced it with a rock. Not that rock, a different rock. That's better. We did have a few other things to consider when making the islands, though.
The difference between sort of having flat areas that we could use to sort of have as farming areas for the player, and I wanted that area to be nice and flat and very customizable so the player could make a garden that they wanted to make, something that was very pretty for them. So once I'd actually got a shape of the island and actually sculpted, I actually handed the island off to Lazy so that he could put his designer cap and sort of dictate maybe player choice or how the player would actually move through the environment.
It was really fun for me thinking about different ways we could approach this. This starting island was pretty small, so there wasn't going to be a huge amount I could do. But again, using some tricks I'd learned from making Amber's Tale, crafting the environment in such a way that it draws the player's eyes towards somewhere you want them to look. In this case, to the left-hand side of the island. I wanted to guide the player towards the new objective that we'd set up. I wanted them to find the obelisk. Props to Brad for making this statue, by the way. It was part of one of their university submissions. But this obelisk was set up as a quest objective, and upon completion of said quest, would unlock a bridge, allowing the player access to the next island. And at this point, I passed it back off to Brad to do a little bit more art.
One of the final things that I also did as well on the art pass is, after having the player path, I actually started playing the game, did a little bit of test through, and from that testing, I managed to find certain points where the island looked really good compositionally, and these are our sort of key art points. Also an opportunity for us to basically use cameras for main menus later on.
And that's exactly what I did. Brad showed me a point of interest, and I basically just moved the camera there, copied it all over into the main menu scene, and after Mollard whipped out a quick logo for the game, we had a very good-looking main menu.
Now we're getting on to the last 2 days, and this is really where the crunch kicks in.
Yeah, you heard that right. We probably did about 50% of the total work in the last 2 days. Just typical game jam shenanigans.
Up until this point, probably haven't been working as fast as I potentially should have. And now I am just sat there, painting away, getting things thrown at me from left to right, being like, I'm on it. And then it'd be like, okay, we also need this. Awesome, I'm on it.
At this point, we'd also really nailed down the theme of the game. You would be playing as a witch. This also happens to explain why you can't just swim to the other islands and you need the bridge, because like, witches don't like water. It also really helped drive the direction for most of the UI elements and the rest of the models that we had left to create.
With the witch markings, it also kind of lended itself really nicely to the fact that we were doing it quickly. What I would have liked to have done really is fully rendered images. For example, like with the furnace, sort of sparks coming out of it, flames, you know, even like ocean kind of thing. There was just absolutely no way. By, again, breaking it down simplistically, it keeps it on theme, but it also allows me to just work way quicker.
We also had to follow through with our progression plans and get that second island made quickly, as it would end up containing 2 of the final plants which would be needed to complete the game. I kind of touched on this earlier when I was talking about Slime Rancher, but we really wanted to nail down multiple different types of progression going on simultaneously. This would just ensure the player always had something to do and wouldn't feel like the game was getting overly too repetitive. The general loop would have the player foraging and gathering to bring resources to the skill tree. The skill tree acts as a medium-length quest system. The obelisk that we set up required much more complex recipes and items to complete the quest, so that acted as a longer term goal, something you would discover quite early on in your playthrough and always be building up towards via these shorter term quests in the skill tree. It would also require you to build planters and other machines, building out your farm area as an additional form of progression. There are so many more things that we could do with this. Just like in Slime Rancher, we could have a separate NPC request system for a variety of different rewards. Even things like unlocking sub areas areas within the islands. Basically, these types of games are all about just constantly rewarding the player. But then again, it's all well and good having these quests in place, but we can't do any of it if we don't have the second island itself made. And Brad and I worked quite closely on this one.
We had to make a decision, more or less, on what biome did we want to go down, what sort of made the most sense, or what did we feel made the most sense at this stage. So obviously our home biome is kind of a bit of like it's like a grassy foresty island. We wanted a change of pace, and we wanted a different look to the next island. We also wanted something that would theme really well for the next sort of set of plants, almost like the next tier, really. We thought snowy tundra made quite a lot of sense, you know, because the next two plants that you're going to be finding on those two islands was coal shrooms and bulberries, which is our iron plant in quotation marks.
So I got to work blocking out the overall shape of the island itself, and so Brad could then come in and decorate it from top to bottom. I actually had a lot of fun learning how to use Unity's terrain systems, since I'd never touched them before. I'd never actually used 3D terrain systems ever, except technically in Minecraft way back in the day. But I stuck on some lo-fi and just cracked on.
So after Lazy had handed me back some, basically like a template, a level design of an island. You know what, even did me a solid as well and did a little bit of texture painting, chucked a few art assets in there, what would make sense.
What can I say except you're welcome?
It was really easy for me to then come in afterwards. And as an artist on this island, I had a bit more of an emphasis on trying to tell a couple of really small stories, and some little tiny things like that can all make the environment just seem just that little bit more interesting.
And one of those things was having a plateau at the top of this mountain.
Going forward, I'm thinking maybe the player would want to build a lot of planters in that area, maybe set up a secondary base, sort of keeping the options open, but making sure that everything was fully arted and was clear and concise and looked good.
That had been a pretty intense work day. So that evening I settled down and ticked off a few more achievements, actually just leaving a handful left for me to collect, albeit they would be the tricky ones. Waking up the next day, on the final day of the game jam, I was super inspired looking at all of the work Brad had done on the island, and everything really started to come together. So I just spent a couple of hours making a system that would help really pull it together. I updated the shader graph that we used for the skybox and the clouds to alert between two different gradients based on which islands you were on. On the starting island, there'll be a nice blue, bright skies, lovely clouds. And on the snowy biome, we would desaturate everything, and also add different particle effects around the player based on where you were in the world as well. Snow falling in the snowy island and lovely petals falling around you from the nearby trees on the starter island. I've also not really talked about the spawning of the plants out in the wild, but earlier on I'd made a system that would allow us to basically paint onto the environment where we want different things to spawn. It meant it was really easy for Brad to do while he was setting up all the environmental art.
I think where the project's focus was moving backwards and forwards. So it was like first island, locking on that one, get that looking good, then it's second island, locking on that one, get that one good. And then we'd sort of come back to the first island a little bit because we're working on the workbenches. And at that stage, we didn't actually have any concepts for the workbenches because Molly had to do UI. She was working on all this other stuff, and I had to get in and sort of look at how does the furnace look, how does the workbenches look. We were all swamped, we were all, you know, proper bogged in with work. So yeah, I sort of set about making the furnace and cracked on with that.
And that last day was brutal. I think we ended up all working like 14 hours straight, only really stopping for a bite to eat. We were all really tired, but we had so much left to do, and little things were starting to catch us out.
I think at that stage, everybody was kind of working quite separately. Like everybody was sort of very much on their own thing. I think Mol was sort of, again, doing UI. You were sort of on UI stuff, but then some mechanical stuff as well. And then at that point, I was basically just on the workbenches, and I felt like I think it was probably the first time in the project where it felt like we were all on very separate things. Weirdly right towards the end as well, but...
And we really were. I was polishing off the functionality of the skill tree, making sure it all worked, and had Mol's new UI elements in place.
After I had gotten all of the workbenches done, I think at that stage, there wasn't really any 3D art left to sort of go in. So I just decided just to do some play testing and sort of get an idea of maybe some initial balancing, maybe, because I feel like at that stage as well, we hadn't really played the game all the way through, because we'd got the research bench in. There was a bit of a research tree for you to sort of go through. You know, things were sort of starting to cost. We had like enough different plants where, you know, you want to try and make decisions on growing different things. So yeah, I just did some testing, looking at the research tree and like how much the research upgrade should sort of cost.
It was at this point we realized our game had a huge flaw. There was no real need to use the planters. There was no need to build a garden. Everything you would need grew out in the wild or could be crafted directly from those resources. We had to make a drastic change, and quickly.
We wanted to create an emphasis on certain plants that you can't even find out in the wild. You know, if you want to grow wood at home because you need more wood, you've got the option to. But if you want rope, you'll have to craft it out of maybe something like fiber and rock. And then from that fiber and rock, you would get a rope seed that you would then have to grow and then harvest from that point on. And I think that opens up the game for us in lots of different ways. I mean, we get sillier plants from that point on. So very much that initial excitement of having all of this crazy stuff turned into plants.
This would mean taking the 3 reagents we had, iron ingots, rope, and paper, and creating 3 new plants for them. As currently you didn't grow them, you just crafted them in a type of workbench.
There is also that planting side of it, and I think that gives the planting side a little bit more life. And the sky's the limit from that point on.
But we didn't have the time for it. But without that, one of the core pillars of the game, farming, would be useless. We all had work over the weekend, which meant we really couldn't work on the game enough to get it completed in a way that would do it justice. And did that mean we'd failed the game jam?
We had really cut it close, and I think by the end of that day, we had just managed to sort of stop maybe just before the line, if not on it.
But that's when I thought back to the goals that we'd set ourselves.
We have to make Brad's dream game come to life with at least 15 minutes of gameplay.
I mean, do we have this? What does Brad think about the game that we made for him? And how does Moll feel about it all? I didn't know.
I love it. Like, you know, what we've got here, I think, can be quite fun. It's scalable. It's got scope. We can either dial it all the way back if we need to. And I really like the idea of making a player feel as if, you know, they are a florist in like this fantasy sort of world with all these crazy plants.
I also found it really satisfying, you know, seeing your art go from 2D to 3D and then having it, you know, fully interactable within a game. Amazing experience. And I just hope that I continue working on Florager at some point.
And that's when we decided we may not have met our original deadline, but that does not mean this is a failure. We all learned so much, and more importantly, despite a pretty slow start and some rough patches.
This is the bit where a bit of character's going to come out now, Lazy. You're allowed to be in the background, aren't you, for this bit? We nearly fell out a few times. I know full well that you were talking to Diana. You were like, is an expletive.
I mean, maybe, but hey, game jams can be stressful. And I'm not gonna lie, I was pushing them really hard. I just wanted to make sure they saw their own potential.
Yeah, but you did it from a place of love, didn't you?
I did. And hey, we all worked really well together, especially in this second week. We stuck together and encouraged each other.
And ultimately, that's what you're all there for.
I feel like doing this was a very good sort of insight into the whole workflow, kind of pressure that you experience in the gaming industry. I found that going from the very start, it would take me 2 days to do a concept. And then at the end, I was getting them out in probably about 30 minutes.
And after all putting in just a little bit of extra work over the following week, between uni, which had just started up again, we have something playable and something we're all really proud of. It's also available for you to play on itch.io right now. We would absolutely love to get your feedback on this. What do you think about the game? And is it something worth spending a bit more time developing? And all I had left to do at this point was one final thing. The thing you're all really here for. One final achievement in Slime Rancher. I had to complete the rush mode and earn 75,000 new bucks before the time ran out. It's essentially a separate speedrun mode of the game. And I did it 3 minutes after the deadline. 3 minutes past 12 on day 15. But I don't care. I'm calling it a win. As we've seen during this process, learning new skills can be daunting, but with Brilliant, you'll click with concepts you used to struggle with. Brilliant helps you excel in math and coding with step-by-step interactive lessons, letting you learn by doing. Brilliant personalizes learning for you. It starts at the right level based on your background and is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Harvard, and Stanford. It's an effective and fun way to learn. You'll learn by solving problems, not just watching videos. Brilliant's computer science and programming courses help build a strong foundation for students, with a focus on structuring logic, ensuring correctness, and efficiency. They also give vibe coders with little to no experience the knowledge to build confidently, allowing you to understand why something works, not just that it does. To learn for free on Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/LazyTStudios, or scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. Brilliant's also given our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant.